Welcome to the 2025 Florida Chamber Legislative Fly-In. To kick off our program with an overview of the state of business in Florida, please put your hands together to welcome President and CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, Mark Wilson.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to be the first to welcome you officially back to Tallahassee again. As Alicia just mentioned, I'm Mark Wilson, and I have the absolute blessing of serving as the president and CEO of your Florida Chamber of Commerce. And I know many of you have looked over the agenda. You see we have over 25 experts that you're going to hear from. And as I was coming over here today, I thought it feels like 10 minutes ago we were together a year ago talking about what might happen in the 2024 legislative season. And what we talked to you about then is to remind you it was an election year. And so when you look at the agenda today, you're going to see we're going to spend a bit of time talking about what does all of that mean, right? You hear about elections have consequences. What does that mean? Believe it or not, we're already into a full-blown election season again for 2026. And if you think 2024 was something, there's a reason that we have a full-time political operations team at the Florida Chamber. You're going to hear from them later today. And it's because in a state like Florida, where the whole country's watching us, the whole country's watching what we do on homeowners insurance and what we do on litigation reform and what we do with research and development and what we do to match up our colleges with what the business community needs. The country is watching Florida. And that means out-of-state groups invest a lot of money in the future of Florida. And that may or may not be aligned with what you all believe, but it's why we can't sleep on what's happening on the national stage. Now, my job here in the next little bit is really as simple as just setting the stage. You're going to hear, like I said, you're going to hear from about 25 different experts. We have our governor will be joining us tomorrow, our Speaker of the House, our Senate President. You're going to hear from a future Speaker of the House on one of our most important long-term initiatives, which is our mental health initiative. And so I'll cover some of that in my opening comments. Well, let me just one more time reiterate something that I share with this group on a regular basis, and that is that, Florida's in an interesting place right now. I would call it at a crossroads, right? So clearly, we're on track for our Florida 2030 blueprint goals. But clearly, in the video, you heard Keith Koenig, our chair, talk about the importance of unifying the business community for good. And over the next day, I want you to be thinking about Florida as an aircraft carrier. And I want you to think about this. Some of you have heard me say this before, but if ever there was a time to unite together for good, right? 67 counties and 412 cities. We've got members of the Florida Chamber all over the place. So many local chambers of commerce are here with us today, and I'm so grateful that you support your local chamber and the good work that they do. But imagine if an aircraft carrier had 5,000 outboard motors on it, and we just said to 5,000 different people, point the motor wherever you want it to go. I think most of you know what would happen. That aircraft carrier would just sit and spin. It would be completely useless. The point is, we've got momentum in Florida, and the kinds of challenges that we have are generally the kind of challenges most countries and most states wish that they had. And I want to show you some of that here in just the next few minutes. My hope when you leave tomorrow, after you've heard from the governor and you've heard from our legislative leaders and you heard from several state agencies, by the way, some of the ones that aren't on the agenda to speak to you are going to be at the reception tonight, and so I hope you'll get those connections made as well. But I hope when you leave tomorrow, it's very clear that whether your issue is early learning or volunteerism or protecting the environment or investing in infrastructure or AI or litigation reform, whatever it might be, I hope what we see here that we've all got to be all in on all of that. It all speaks to how we become the 10th largest economy in the world. Let me start off by telling you, I'm going to ask you all to give these folks a round of applause. Our sponsors make this event possible, so would you please thank them as we get started? And those of you that come to every event we do every other month, you know I talk about this because it's important. We don't do one-day summits at the Florida Chamber. We do all year long moving of the needle on whatever we talk about. You want to talk about early learning, you want to talk about getting rid of the business rent tax, you want to talk about how we can increase manufacturing and have more exports. That's not something we talk about at a summit. This is a check-in report card to talk about how are we doing as a state and what's left. So these sponsors make the all year long possible. I also want to thank the board of the Florida Chamber, right? Every industry in Florida, small business, big business, international, domestic, you name it. This is the board that says, how can all of us work together to put long-term ahead of the short-term? And I appreciate their leadership for that. On your trip up here, if you came up this morning, you might have missed, I had a statewide op-ed this morning that really set the stage for the conversation that we're going to have today and tomorrow, and set the stage for what I hope the legislature and the governor will take a close look at. And that is, two things are true at the same time. Most states wish they could be like Florida, but at the same time, we have some cost pressures, right? Think of affordability of living in Florida. You're going to see a little bit of that in a bit. We still have more to do on lawsuit abuse, right? Families deserve that. Local businesses do that. So the point of it is, even though Florida is winning in almost every metric, we can't just sit back and say that's good enough. We've actually got to keep fighting for that Florida 2030 blueprint. And that's what this brief is all about. Let me just give you one example that was in my op-ed this morning. And you haven't heard this before because we're just unveiling this today. So we took a look at all the business relocations in the country where, right, one company leaves one state and goes to another. So the new data's in, and Florida's #1 in the United States last year. #1 in the United States. We're roughly a little over 3 times the second place state, which is Tennessee. California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, as you would imagine, are all losing. More firms are leaving their states than are coming there. So Florida's #1 in the country on what we call net firm relocation or net firm migration. You're also going to hear from Sheridan, our senior research economist, in just a few minutes. I'm going to introduce her when I'm done here. She's going to show you some of the migration patterns, or some of the migration numbers. She's also going to show you what's happening with net income migration. We happen to be #1 in that category as well. Again, don't anybody leave here thinking we're #1 or #5 in a bunch of things, so there's no work to do. There's a lot of work to do. Trust me. A lot of companies are relocating to Florida, right? And I just gave you some of the stats on that. But whether it's people like Ken Griffin leaving Chicago and relocating the whole company down to Miami, right? And they serve on our board now. And even they know, right? All of the companies on here know that Florida's where it's at. And so I'm asking all of you, whether it's crime, whether it's water quality, whether it's affordability of housing, it all works together. It's no one thing. I mentioned giving a mission brief. You know I do this at every single meeting. So thanks to our Florida Chamber Foundation and the team. So the Florida 2030 Blueprint is literally the state's strategic plan. Where do we need to be by 2030? This is measured on the floridascorecard.org. Sheridan sends out a monthly video when the brand new numbers come in. So it's easy to stay tuned on this. But if we were a country, today, we would be the 16th largest economy on the planet, right? And we have about a $1.7 trillion economy. And so just be thinking about what a big deal Florida is. By the way, we have 10 million people in Florida who work, 10 million jobs. Just to put in perspective, that's more jobs than 40 states have people. And so one of the things I want you to help us think through as you're meeting with legislators and agency leaders as you're here, we can't compare Florida to other states anymore. We've got to be thinking globally. Where does Florida at on the global stage? And how does this regulation impact the future of AI? How does that tax impact the future of job development? It's all related. So 39 goals, 39 things we have to do. You're going to hear about that when the legislative panel comes up later on. In terms of the big numbers you see on the bottom, we have 23 million residents. We're going to add 2.8 million more by 2030. We need 1.45 million more new jobs. We're going to have 40 million more annual visitors on top of the record 140 million that we had last year. And everyone's favorite part, that's going to put 2.5 million more drivers on our roads by 2030. And I know there's at least one person out there saying, how do we stop that? Because I get to speak all over the state, and someone always comes up and asks that. And I want everyone to be united. That aircraft carrier I talked about before, you don't stop that. And you wouldn't want to stop that even if you could. The better question is, how do we do it the right way? And that's what the Florida 2030 Blueprint is all about. As a matter of fact, I've said often, remember I said we're going to add 2.8 million more people by 2030? Well, how do we grow smarter over the next 2.8 million than we did over the last 2.8 million? Right? If we can just think like that, we'll make better decisions where we put the long term ahead of the short term. Speaking of long term ahead of the short term, our foundation has a research team headed up by Dr. Keith Richard, and we're always looking sort of around the corner. What are the big issues that are either here or are going to be coming around the corner? Some of this you're going to hear about more at this conference, but every one of these reports, I want you to download these, and I want you to consider having a management meeting in the next couple of months on each one of these reports. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. I'm going to go into, on another slide, the top 30 in-demand careers in Florida all the way out to 2032. Some of you know we have the best colleges in the United States, the best universities in the United States. But you might not know that we also have really cool career opportunities in every region of Florida. And our middle schoolers and high schoolers don't know that. And so we're doing something about that. You see, we have a migration trends report. This one's worth getting your managers around a table and talking about. Sheridan's going to tell you a little bit more about this. But the net here is, in 2023, if you look 2023 to 2024, we had more people leave Florida in 2024 than we did in 2023. Those trends are going the wrong direction. Affordability is the number one reason people give. So I think everyone in here knows we've got to do more on cost of living, cost of doing business. Sheridan's going to walk you through our economic forecast. And we just published today a brand new look at property insurance, think homeowners insurance throughout Florida. Write these numbers down or burn them in your head, right? 11, 17, and 34. Since Governor DeSantis signed the 2023 reforms, that took a new look at the way lawsuit abuse works relative to homeowners insurance. We've had 11 new homeowners insurance companies enter the market in Florida, and that's fantastic news for all of you and your employees. 17 companies have filed for rate decreases since then, and 34 companies have filed for no rate increase at all. What that means is the reforms that we had are working. We promised you last year that within 1, 2, 3 years you would start to see some positive movement. Candidly, it happened faster than I think I told you that I thought it would, but it's happening. We need to do more, but it's happening. There's 4 things that are going on. I mentioned you're going to hear from the governor, you're going to hear from the House Speaker, you're going to hear from the Senate President. And I'm really proud of Frank Walker, Carolyn Johnson, and the whole Policy Council team for being able to put this entire agenda together. I think it speaks volumes that our state's leaders want to come hear from you and want to talk to you as well. Really proud of the team for that. So that you know, I promise I travel Florida more than anybody probably but the governor does. And so I always owe you, what am I hearing when I travel to Citrus County or to Volusia County? What am I hearing when I travel the state? Top 4 issues people are talking to me about, right? Talent. This is some version of it, whether it's early learning or workforce. We have more jobs in Florida than people looking for work. And that doesn't count the fact that the people are showing up looking for work might not have the qualifications and skills that you need them to have. So that's a whole conversation in and of itself. Affordable housing, right? I think we all know median home price is over $400,000 in Florida. It's the #1 reason people cite for leaving Florida, right? We actually have a lot of pressure from people in the 25 to 35-year-old category, more leaving Florida than moving in. And this is the #1 reason why. I don't know if you can read it on the bottom here, but about 29%, just think about this throughout the 24 hours we're together, about 29% of people in Florida who work and rent, you with me? 29% of people who work and rent spend more than 50% of their pay on housing. So as you're sitting here thinking through, how do we bring down the cost of living in Florida through things like lawsuit abuse and getting rid of business rent tax? And at the same time, how do we make sure people know that the job that you can get locally, maybe through a couple years at the college, is a very high-paying job, right? We've got our work cut out to educate people about both sides of the equation. Litigation, again, I just talked about how this one is trending back in the right direction. A brand new national report came out, and an average family of 4 in Florida last year is spending about $5,700 a year to live here just because of all the billboards and the broken lawsuit abuse problem that we have. So we fix that. It costs nothing. It just is courage from the legislature. We fix that, and you start to see things like insurance go down, right? It's a big deal. Remember years ago when Airbus decided to manufacture in the Southeast US? The reason they cited they didn't pick Florida was because of our lawsuit climate. And they went to Mobile, Alabama instead. So folks, this stuff matters when we talk about lawsuits. And then finally, infrastructure. We could remember 2.8 million more people are going to be here in 2030. So whether it's water, electricity, broadband, roads, rail, seaports, spaceports, right? It all connects together because we have to move freight and we have to move people, and that's a really big deal. We're going to talk a lot about manufacturing, and you might not think of Florida as a manufacturing state, but we are, and we're very intentionally growing this very important sector. Find Kevin Carr and the people at Florida Makes while you're here and ask them what you can do to help manufacturing in your county. We're number 11 right now in the country for manufacturing jobs. We need to be number 5 by 2030. These jobs pay more than the median wages locally. They're also much more resilient when there's a global downturn if those companies are involved in exports. Something to think about. Many of you know Port Tampa Bay, Paul Anderson, great leader, one of the ports in Florida. They're a sponsor of this event. So Paul would tell you if he were up here, if you think of all of the containers that come into Florida, you see them on trucks or you see them on rail or you see them on our big container cargo ships. Those containers that are coming into Florida, for every 100 that's full, half are leaving empty. So everybody in this room is paying more, right? Think about one-way cars or one-way flights. One way to bring down the cost of doing business in Florida, to bring down the cost of the things that we consume, is to make that transportation cost less. And one way to do that is to make more so that we can make more, move it, multiply the impacts. Remember I said earlier, if Florida was a country, we would be the 16th largest economy on the planet. Our very clear goal is to unite together to become the 10th largest economy in the world by 2030. And I just wanted to give you kind of a look at what that means. Canada today is the 10th largest economy on the planet. And incidentally, about 10% of Canadians visit Florida every single year. 1 in 10 Canadians visit us every single year. So our goal by 2030 is for our economy to be bigger than Canada's. Okay, I'm not going to make any comments about whether there'll be a state by then or not, but I know you're thinking it because I do this every day. But look at what we've done since we launched the 2030 Blueprint in 2018. Just to take some inventory of what the actual numbers are. Our GDP is up about 50%. We've added over 2 million residents, over 1 million 1.3 million jobs, and 15 million annual visitors. So more people want to live here, more people are moving their businesses here, more people visit here. So remember that slide I had, how do we do this smarter over the next 2.8 million than we did over the last 2.8 million? The FloridaScorecard.org, people around the country talk about this. Remember, every county has their own version of this. We created this years ago when the Huizenga family overnighted us $1 million and said, you need to do this, right? We need to measure how Florida's doing. So the FloridaScorecard.org, it's a free tool. If your management team isn't looking at the Florida Scorecard every single week and going into the counties that you operate in and seeing what's happening with job starts and with real estate, right, with population trends, then you're missing a real important management tool. But check this out. I said we have more jobs open than people looking for work. And that's at the statewide number. I'm going to show it to you locally in just a second. Population growth, people ask me all the time, are we still growing? Does the chamber think we're going to be growing out to 2030? Some of you have seen this slide before. All 67 counties are growing. All 67 counties are going to have more people in them in 2030 than they do today. But the growth is not even. More than half of the growth is going to be in 5 counties, and over 80% of the growth is going to be in 10 counties. Happy to walk through that offline if anyone's interested. What about new business startups? One of the 2030 goals, and we partnered with Greg Britton and the small business SBDCs in Florida. One of the goals was, what if we could lead the country in new business startups? What if we could do that by 2030? And you might remember last year I announced that just a few months earlier, we became #1 already. And so Florida is already the #1 state in the country for new business startups. By the way, #1 in the country for Black-owned businesses with employees, #2 in the country for Hispanic-owned businesses, and #2 in the country for women-owned businesses. We're on our way to being #1 in every category that you can measure the diversity of opportunity in Florida, right, in America. It's a really cool thing. But look at our numbers compared to other states. In December, we created 54,000 new businesses. That's 12,000 more than Texas did. So when you hear a lot about what Texas is doing, compare Texas and Florida on an apples to apples. People are picking Florida when they're starting new companies. Now, I mentioned that the population growth isn't going to be even around Florida. Neither is the delta between the jobs that are open and the people looking for work. So we have a county in Florida where for every 100 open jobs, there's only 51 people looking for work. We have another one on the opposite end. For every 100 open jobs, there's 425 people looking for work. So I can't give you a statewide silver bullet answer of what to do with this. This is why you join your local Chamber of Commerce. This is why you get involved in what's happening locally, right? Because we have statewide solutions that have to be tailored and implemented locally. This is possibly one of the biggest game changer slides I'm going to share with you today, so I hope you'll go back home. I hope you'll get your management team around a table. If you're on a local nonprofit board, this needs to be on the agenda at your next couple of meetings. Our research team, in this case led by Rachel Ludwig, who you'll hear from or you'll meet here at the conference. Rachel's our vice president of all of our talent programs. She comes to us from DOE. And what she did and her team did is they took the top 30 in-demand careers, I was talking about this earlier, in each of the career source regions, so all 21 regions around Florida, and they said all the way out to the year 2032, what are the most in-demand careers going to be in each region? In demand means what you think it does, which ones are we going to need the most, but also on a Venn diagram, also pay 30% more than the median wages, okay? Now, it's an all of the above talent strategy. We need colleges, we need universities, both public and private. About half of these in-demand careers don't require 4 years. And I think if I brought the university presidents up here and the college presidents up here, the technical school presidents up here, they would look at this and say, we need you in the business community to partner with us to tell us what exactly do you need from those institutions. And I know I'm a broken record on that, but it's working in the parts of Florida. So you can download this. You see the QR code there. Be the advocate in your region. So what if the school board and the county commission and the Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Group and the mayor every month put this up on screen and said, we're going to take time in our county commission meeting to talk about what kind of cool jobs are we going to have in this county, in this community, in this region, and what are we doing about it to match up with the local chamber and with our local colleges, right? Just imagine the game that would change. I'm begging you to do that between this year, and I can't make you do it. I'm just begging you to do it. A couple more things, and then I'm going to turn the program over to Sheridan. I mentioned in my opening remarks when I first got up here about 2024 being an election year, and I'm so proud of our board. I'm so proud of our team to recruit candidates in Florida 2, 4, 6 years out sometimes, to spend and invest north of $20 million in a state like Florida in an election cycle and to win 101 out of 103 races that we engage in. It's just when people who do what I do for a living around the country, like that's unheard of. And I thank all of you for making it possible. Thank Frank Walker and his team for those results. I also want to thank, we had a constitutional amendment last year that the Florida Chamber helped lead the defeat of, and it had to do with putting drugs in the Constitution. And I had the privilege of flying around Florida with the governor, with the First Lady, and I have to tell you, this was an all hands on deck kind of a thing. And here's what I learned when we were out doing conferences all over Florida on this. Wherever you are on drugs, that's up to you. But what people got is that this doesn't belong in the Constitution. So when we say protect our Constitution from people who want to spend $150 million for whatever their idea is to get the signatures and put it on the ballot, we now know often using fraud to get it there. It's the putting this stuff in the Constitution that the Florida Chamber challenges. And I just want to be grateful to them. A couple other quick things. We announced last year that OSHA was looking at a national heat rule of how could they look at states like Florida and provide a whole new set of rules on you working in an environment basically above 80 degrees. Full disclosure, it's a lot more dangerous to work in 0-degree weather than it is in 82-degree weather. Okay, so that's a whole nother issue for another day. But nevertheless, our health council in Florida, led by some of the top safety managers in the United States, candidly, put a very coherent solution together, sent it to OSHA, and we're kind of waiting to see what OSHA is going to do with this heat rule. This is a big game changer if they go the wrong direction on it. So don't check out on this one. It's still very much in play. I mentioned mental health earlier. Katie Yater and our whole team on the leadership cabinet put this together. We launched it with Michael Phelps, you might remember. This is the stake in the ground. How do we become the #1 state in America for doing mental health outcomes the right way? And so you'll hear actually Sam Garrison, a future House Speaker, talk a little bit about what we're doing together and why this matters so much to the future of Florida. I mentioned insurance earlier, and let me just tell you, this nightmare that's going on in California right now, I predict that when the dust settles, so to speak, and I was just out there a couple of weeks ago, by the way, what a tragedy. I predict when the dust settles, you're going to see insurance companies go out of business in California. And when you compare the regulatory environment out there with the very smart, sort of methodical way we're rebuilding our insurance markets here, I think you're just going to see this dichotomy where once again, Florida is going to be something people want to see. See the heat map there? Do you know in 2024, I'll tell you something you probably haven't heard. Florida had the lowest homeowners insurance rates in the United States last year, increase. The lowest increase in the United States last year at about 1%. Texas was 3.5 times up. California was 13% up. Okay, you don't hear that. As I end here, one thing I need to do for everybody is be a little bit of a weather forecaster for you, right? And so a lot of you want to know, is this bill going to pass? What's going to happen on that issue? So much of it is we reset. We have a governor, we have a new speaker, we have a new president. What the Florida Chamber pushes never changes. Growing the private sector and making Florida more competitive is what we want to do. But who gets elected makes a big difference. And so remember, here's the numbers right now. Just over 3 years ago, there were more Democrats registered in Florida than Republicans, October of 2021, if you can see that on the screen. Now it's Republicans running away with it. There's about 1.15 million more Republicans than Democrats in Florida. All 67 counties have a fewer percentage of Democrats in them today than they did 2 years ago. In a typical month, you see about half the new voters registering Republican. Then neither Republican or Democrat, they register NPA. Third place would be Democrats. You're going to get a chance to hear from, like I say, over 25 leading experts in Florida, from the governor to the speaker to the president and several agency heads, some future leaders in the legislature, and other people who are just experts in their own right. Please find them throughout the meeting if you want to meet somebody. I can't promise that we can make that happen because we have a lot of moving parts, but I'd sure like to try. So I now get to introduce the next speaker to you. As I mentioned, my job was to try to set the table so that you know, where are we, what are we trying to accomplish? Sheridan Morby is the senior research economist here at the Florida Chamber Foundation. So if you like what you see with the scorecard, if you like what you see every month with the video that she does, if you want to know kind of who's behind, how are we measuring this and where are we going, you're about to hear from Sheridan. She'll be speaking to both of our boards this week about what's going on in Florida. So find her on a break as well if you have any questions. Last thing I'll say is, if I haven't had the privilege of meeting one of you in this room, I hope we'll fix that on the break or at the reception tonight. I'd really love to officially welcome you to Tallahassee, and thanks for supporting the Florida Chamber. Thanks for being here.